At the reading of my grandfather's will, the room smelled like overripe lilies and anxiety. The Eddingtons don't cry. They scheme, they whisper, they smile too tightly. I sat beside my mother in a stiff mahogany chair, feeling like a prop in a very old play. The lawyer, Mr. Lowell, looked like he hadn't slept. He cleared his throat too much, pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose 3 times before even saying a word. I could hear my cousin Lila cracking her knuckles under the table. She always did that when she wanted something. My name is Claire Eddington. I was 36 that day, and I already knew what was coming. I'd seen it in my mother's hands that morning, how she kept rubbing her thumb along the inside of her palm like something there was burning. Lowell laid out the documents page by page. Property deeds, stock holdings, obscure trusts. Each beneficiary got their line in the script. My Uncle Frank smiled when he got the boatyard. Lila blinked fast when she realized she wasn't named directly, just her heirs. Then finally the check. Mr. Lowell announced it slowly, as if drawing it out could soften the shock. $36 million, he said. To Joanna Eddington. That's my mother. She didn't move. She just reached out, lifted the check carefully from the table like it was a dead bird. The silence in the room was thick enough to chew. Then she opened her purse, pulled out a lighter silver old, flicked it once more. The 3rd time it caught. Someone gasped, maybe Aunt Lydia. Mom touched the flame to the corner of the check. It curled like a leaf in autumn. She held it until it burned halfway, then dropped it into Mr. Lowell's metal wastebasket. Ash and silence spiraled up together. She's lost it, Frank muttered. Joanna, what are you? She cut him off with one sentence. Just one. That money was already a grave? She stood up then, calm, composed, like nothing had happened. I didn't speak, didn't blink. I just looked at the flame flickering in the bottom of the bin, the charred remains of what everyone else in that room had been waiting their whole lives for. $36 million gone in seconds. And me, I just smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I'd seen this fire before. I saw it when I was 7 in our kitchen when Mom burned a photograph in the sink. I asked who was in it. She said nobody who stayed. I saw it when I was 15 when I found an envelope full of foreign currency hidden in a box of Christmas ornaments. And I saw it last winter when she stood in the cold garden at 3 a.m., barefoot, just staring at the moon like she was waiting for it to ask forgiveness. So no, I didn't flinch when she burned the check. I'd already learned that nothing is louder than the things my mother doesn't say. Everyone else in that room looked confused, stunned, offended. But I knew. This wasn't about money. It never had been. It was about closing a door no one else knew existed. After the will reading, she didn't wait for anyone. She walked right past the old oil paintings, the velvet drapes, the bitter whispers. I followed, even though she hadn't asked. Outside, the wind smelled like distant rain and honeysuckle. She lit a cigarette with the same lighter. The flame looked smaller out here. You knew I'd do it, she said, her voice like gravel and smoke. I figured, I replied, but I didn't know why. She didn't answer, just looked out at the trees, the same trees that had been on this land for over a century. She grew up here. So did I. So did the ghosts. There's a story, she said finally, and it never wanted to be told. But it's in our blood, Claire. You have to know that. She didn't explain more. She never does. But I saw something in her eyes then, something I hadn't seen in years. Regret, number clarity maybe, a decision finally made. She flicked the cigarette into the gravel, walked to the car, drove off without a word. I stood there a little longer, watching the smoke rise from the lawyer's office chimney. It looked like it was coming from the earth itself. That night, back at the estate, I wandered into the sitting room, the same one where my grandfather had taken all his family portraits. Above the fireplace, his stern eyes stared down from a heavy gold frame. I stared back. "You knew she'd do it too, didn't you?" I whispered. "You knew she'd break the chain. But maybe it wasn't broken. Maybe it had only just begun to burn." The next morning, the air in the house tasted like soot. The will reading had ended, but the family hadn't left. They lingered in corners, rattling teacups and pretending not to talk about the fire. Lila cried in the bathroom, loudly enough to be overheard. Uncle Frank sat in the den, bourbon in hand, before noon. He looked like someone who'd just watched his retirement plan turn to ash. I walked past them all like a ghost. My mother had disappeared after driving off. No calls, no note, just the flicker of tire marks on the driveway. No one asked me where she was. They assumed I'd know. But I didn't. Not yet. I went back into the lawyer's office while it was still empty. The wastebasket was still there, full of charred paper. The smell had settled in the wallpaper, like a stain that wouldn't wash out. I pulled up a chair. The check was gone completely. All that remained was the tiniest sliver of green corner curled and blackened. I lifted it with a pencil carefully. It fell apart. It was strange how something so valuable could disappear without a sound. No screaming, no alarms, just a flick of the wrist and some smoke. It reminded me of the letter she burned when I was 9. I came home from school and found her in the kitchen staring at the sink. Something was smoking in the basin. I remember the red envelope. It had gold ink along the edges, the kind used for weddings or warnings. She didn't look at me, just said some doors close without sound. That night Dad didn't come home. He never came back at all. She never explained, never even used his name after that. If I asked, she would say, "Not now," or "It's better not to." The silence became normal. But now, decades later, in this same old house, with these same old people fuming over lost money, I started to wonder if maybe that silence had cost more than anyone realized. I left the office and walked to the back of the estate, to the stone bench under the willow tree. The bench had a small crack running through its side, like a scar. I used to sit here as a teenager, sneaking cigarettes and writing letters I never sent. It always felt like the only place on the property that didn't lie. I sat down and took out my phone. Still no messages from Mom. I scrolled through my texts, wondering if maybe she'd sent something and I'd missed it. Nothing, but there was a number I didn't recognize at the bottom of my recent calls. Blocked. One ring. Hung up. I stared at it. Called it back. Disconnected. Something turned in my gut. I stood and looked up at the house. The third-floor window, the one that belonged to the locked room, was open. That window had never opened, not once in all the years I'd lived here. It was painted shut, nailed once, maybe even sealed. I'd tried to open it when I was 13 during a storm. Got caught. She grounded me for a week. Now it stood open like a blinking eye. I went inside and climbed the staircase slowly. The wood still groaned in the same spots. My footsteps sounded louder than they should have. The door to the room was ajar. Inside, it smelled like cedar and something older. Dust, maybe. Or wax. Mom had left a candle holder on the desk. Brass, heavy old. The same one I'd seen her hold yesterday before the will, before the fire. There was no candle in it, just the base. Tarnished but clean. I reached for it. It was colder than I expected. Then I noticed a small object underneath it, a photograph face down. I lifted it. On the back, in faded ink, 1979. I turned it over. A younger version of my mother stared out from the image, standing beside a man I didn't recognize. He wore a dark suit. His hand was on her shoulder. She was not smiling. Behind them, the same house. Same window. Closed. I slipped the photo into my pocket and sat down in the old rocking chair by the wall. I remembered this chair, it creaked like a whisper. I used to listen for it as a kid, thinking if I heard it creak at night, it meant something was coming. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up in that room just listening, to the silence, to the walls, to the house breathing around me. At 3:12 a.m., I heard a sound, a car pulling into the gravel drive. I went to the window and saw headlights fade. A tall man stepped out, wore a red tie, same black car from my childhood memories. He didn't knock, didn't come to the door. He just stood there looking at the house, and then, as if knowing I was watching, he tipped his head once and drove away. I went downstairs, barefoot, feeling the cold bite into my skin. I opened the front door. Nothing there. Just the echo of gravel and the smell of something faint burnt paper. Not from the lawyer's office. From here. Somewhere closer. I turned slowly, and that's when I saw it. On the entry table, where we used to keep keys and forgotten letters, someone had left a candle. A red one. Melted. Used. No holder. Just wax dripping down onto the oak like blood. I didn't touch the candle. I just stood there in the dark entryway staring at the little red stump as the wax cooled into its final shape, like a wound that had already scarred over. The house made no sound. No pipes, no wind, no shifting walls. Just my own breath, slow and deliberate, and the quiet throb behind my eyes. You learn after a while to listen to what a house isn't saying. This one had been mute most of my life. The candle wasn't there when I came downstairs. That meant someone had placed it while I was in the room upstairs, which meant someone had been inside the house, or still was. I didn't move. Just watched the wax pool at the base. There was something familiar about the shape. The way the wick bent slightly to the left. The way it looked melted from the inside, not the top. Like the flame had come from within. I finally turned around and locked the front door. Whatever this was, I didn't want it running both ways. I went back upstairs. The third-floor hallway had always been a little colder than the rest of the house, like the insulation didn't quite reach it. I felt it even now chill sliding up my arms as I moved toward the open room. The door hadn't moved. Still ajar. Still waiting. I stepped in and turned on the old desk lamp. The candle holder was gone. The photograph still lay where I'd left it on the rocking chair. I picked it up again and studied it. My mother looked no older than 20. The man beside her, tall, square-jawed, not smiling, had something in his eyes I couldn't place. Not malice, not fear, something deeper. Resignation, maybe. I flipped it over again. The date, 1979. 2 years before I was born. I took it to the desk and pulled out the drawer. It stuck, then gave way with a reluctant snap. Inside a small bundle of dried lavender, a broken fountain pen, and a folded piece of notebook paper. I opened it. 3 words written in uneven black ink, "Do not answer." No signature, no context. Just that. I read it twice, then folded it again and put it in my pocket. I didn't know what it meant. But I knew enough to feel it wasn't a warning. It was a rule. The kind of rule people build entire lives around. The room itself hadn't changed since I was a girl. The same faded wallpaper, pale blue with tiny white vines. The same bookshelf with exactly 9 books, spines untouched, corners worn from age, but not use. One of them was a copy of The Turn of the Screw, which had always felt too on the nose. The brass lamp flickered. I reached for the drawer again, feeling around the edges. There was something under the wood lining. A gap. I pulled gently, lifting the base. There it was, A second photograph. This one was older, black and white. It showed the estate during winter snow, piled up along the porch, the trees bare and clawing at the sky. And there in the corner of the image, almost hidden in shadow, was a figure. A child, standing perfectly still. No coat, no hat. Just a dress and long dark hair. I flipped it over. No date, no writing, but something about the way the child stood shoulders forward, arms loose at her sides, felt too deliberate to be accidental. I took it with me. Downstairs, the candle was gone. I froze in the stairwell. The hallway was still empty. No sounds. But the wax puddle remained on the table, slightly cracked now. I looked behind me. The front door was still locked. I checked the windows. Nothing broken, nothing ajar. Someone had been here again. Or maybe they never left. I went into the kitchen, opened the old drawer next to the sink. The same one my mother used to keep matchbooks and junk keys in. I found the lighter, her silver warm from sitting too close to the heating pipe under the cabinet. I held it in my hand for a long time. This was the lighter she'd used to burn the check. Same lighter she used to light the candle in the hallway on Christmas Eve every year without fail, even when we were the only two left in the house. Always the same candle. Red, unscented. She said it was tradition, but she never said whose. When I was 12, I asked her once who started the candle thing. She said, "Before you were born, Claire, that's all." I struck the lighter once. The flame jumped to life, steady and soft. I held it close to the wax puddle. There was something scratched into the oak beneath it. Very faint. Almost invisible unless you were looking for it. A word. Return. I dropped the lighter. The flame died before it touched the wood. I sat on the floor just breathing. The house wasn't whispering. Not yet, but it was remembering. Later that night, I went to the linen closet in the west hallway and pulled out the old black box my mother always kept behind the towels. She said it was just photo stuff. I never believed her. Inside a candle holder, not brass, pewter, same shape, same weight, different material. And a candle, red, unburned, wrapped in a thin strip of paper. The paper said, "For when the door opens." That was it. No instructions, no address. But I knew exactly which door it meant, and I knew it had nothing to do with this house. Not the visible one. He came back the next morning. Same car, same quiet. I heard the engine before I saw him, soft, like it had been idling for a while already. I was standing at the kitchen sink, staring at the sink drain and thinking about the word return when the sound drifted in through the window. Gravel crunching, tires settling. I didn't move. Just wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked slowly to the front door. He hadn't knocked. Again. He just stood there at the edge of the driveway near the sycamore tree where my father used to park. Same black coat, same red tie. Crisp and out of place in the countryside. He looked like a banker or someone playing the part of one, but he didn't have the eyes of a man who dealt in numbers. His gaze held too much patience, like someone who only ever waited. He was older than I remembered. The last time I'd seen him, I was 16. He'd handed my mother a brown envelope and said nothing. She'd opened it at the kitchen table and gone white in the face. That night, she threw away all the kitchen knives and bolted the cellar door shut. Now, here he was again. He didn't speak until I stepped outside. "Claire," he said, almost like a greeting, but not quite. "How do you know my name?" I asked. He blinked slowly. "You've always been named." That wasn't an answer, but it was what I expected from him. "Why are you here?" I asked. "Because the ledger wasn't burned," he replied. The wind lifted a loose curl from my face. I pushed it back behind my ear. "What ledger?" I asked, though I already had a feeling. He smiled. Not with kindness, more like confirmation. She didn't tell you, he said. Even now, she told me enough. No, he said. She gave you silence. Silence is not the same as truth. I stepped down off the porch. He didn't move. Why do you care what she did with the check, I asked. The check was never about inheritance, he said. It was a test. And your mother failed in a way we expected? Then why are you here? He looked up at the house behind me. His eyes landed on the third-floor window, now closed again. Then on the brass number above the door. Then back to me. Because she passed something else down, he said. Something that doesn't belong to her. Or to you. I didn't look away. Neither did he. He reached into his coat and took out another envelope. Brown, unsealed. He held it out. I didn't take it. I'm not playing this game, I said. This isn't a game, Claire, he said. It's a pattern. His fingers never trembled. He wasn't sweating. No nervous tics, just stillness. I reached forward finally and took the envelope. Inside, a single photograph. My mother again. This time, older. Maybe last year, standing beside a door. Not a door I recognized. Steel, industrial, and behind her, barely visible, a man in shadow. Not the man in front of me. You were watching her, she was warned. And now what I asked, you're warning me. He looked at his watch. No, he said. I'm informing you. Then he turned and walked back to the car. No further words. The engine started without a sound. The car turned down the gravel road and disappeared into the trees. I stood there for a long time, holding the envelope. Inside the house, the candle holder sat on the mantel again. This time, it held the candle. Red. Unlit. That night, I went up to the third floor, sat in the rocking chair, held the candle in my lap like it might answer something. I thought about the man with the red tie. How he never aged. How he never really changed. How he always came when things were about to fall apart. I opened the envelope again and turned the photo over. There was a single line written on the back. The debt always finds its name. I kept the candle next to my bed that night. Not on the nightstand. On the floor in its holder near the edge of the rug like it was standing guard. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I just didn't want it near my head. Or maybe I needed to know exactly where it was without having to look. I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's hand dropping the check into the fire again. Over and over. Except each time it wasn't a check, it was the photograph, or the ledger, or my name scrawled in thick red ink. Around 4 a.m., I gave up pretending. I pulled on a sweater, picked up the candle and holder, and took them downstairs. I needed air. The front porch creaked beneath me like it always had. Old wood shifts differently at night, it seems to breathe. I placed the candle on the railing and sat beside it. The stars were faint. The wind had that late summer bite to it, the kind that warned of change without announcing what kind. I lit a match and held it to the candle. It didn't take. Tried again. Nothing. The wick blackened, but no flame held. I thought maybe the wax was too cold. I brought it closer, cupped my hands around it. Still nothing. 3 matches in, I realized it wasn't a problem with the candle. It just wouldn't light. The wind stopped all at once. Not faded, stopped. Like someone had hit mute. That was when I noticed the sound, or the absence of it. No bugs, no frogs, no leaves rustling, just complete humming silence. And then, quietly, footsteps on gravel. I stood. Quickly. Too quickly. My knee cracked. The footsteps didn't come closer. Just circled, around the side of the house. I couldn't see anyone from the porch. I didn't call out. I just stood there holding the unlit candle. They stopped near the back door. And then the air shifted again, everything coming back at once. Crickets whined the faint creak of branches, like the world had exhaled. I stayed there until sunrise. When I finally went back inside, I placed the candle and its holder on the kitchen table. I stared at it while I made coffee. The brass glinted in the first light. The wick still looked fresh untouched. It should have lit. It should have burned. Later that day, I drove into town, took the candle holder with me. I didn't have a plan, just a direction. There's an old antique appraiser in Miller's Point. Name's Greta. She's run the place since I was a teenager. Used to flirt with my father. I think Mom hated that. Or maybe she envied it. Hard to tell with her. Greta was alone in the shop when I arrived. Wind chimes jangled above the door as I stepped in. She looked up and squinted. "Claire," she said, smiling like I hadn't grown 20 years since I last came in. "Haven't seen you since prom dress fittings." I held up the candle holder. She nodded toward the back table. "Let's see what you've brought me." I placed it down. She didn't touch it right away. Just looked at it, circled it once. Then she leaned in and took a slow breath. "Where'd you get this?" she asked, her voice lower now. "Family heirloom," I said. "Not a pretty one," she replied. I didn't say anything. She picked it up, turned it over, ran her fingers along the base. "This isn't decorative," she murmured. "It's mechanical." I looked at her. "What do you mean it was built to hold something else, not just a candle?" She turned it upside down and twisted the bottom. There was a faint click. A compartment opened. Inside a hollow tube. Empty. She looked at me, her face unreadable. "Ever opened this before?" she asked. I shook my head. "Then whoever gave it to you wanted you to." I nodded slowly. She didn't ask more. Just handed it back. I drove home with the candle holder in the passenger seat, silent and cold. When I pulled into the driveway, the black car was there again. Same spot. Empty. I walked inside fast. Checked the doors. The windows. Nothing disturbed. But the candle was gone from the table. In its place was a photograph. My mother again. This time younger than any other picture I'd seen, maybe 17, standing in front of the cellar door. Her face was still. In her hand, the same candle holder. I turned the photo over. Blank. I took the holder upstairs, put it back on the floor beside the bed. This time, I didn't try to light anything. I just sat there in the dark, listening. And when the wind stopped again, I whispered something into the silence without meaning to. "Why didn't you tell me?" There was no answer, just the faintest warmth from the brass, as if something inside it had heard me. She always wore it. Her wedding ring? A plain, thin band of dull gold that never caught the light no matter how bright the room. She wore it when she was washing dishes, when she was raking leaves, even when she was pruning roses in gloves she insisted had holes, because feeling the thorns was part of the work. I never saw her without it, not once. Until last night. I came downstairs at midnight, the air thick with that old familiar pull like memory had weight. The house was asleep but watching. I don't know how else to explain it. She was in the kitchen. Not really in it, but sort of leaning against it, her hands flat on the counter. Still in her nightgown. She hadn't heard me yet. That's when I saw it. The ring sitting beside her on the counter. Alone. Naked. She turned slightly enough that I caught the bare skin of her left ring finger in the moonlight and saw it, a small, perfect circle. A scar the size of a pencil eraser right where the ring had always rested. Pale and slightly raised, like the skin had closed around something that once cut too deep. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. I watched her stare out the window above the sink. not into the darkness, but through it, like she wasn't seeing anything out there at all. She spoke first, finally her voice quiet and clipped. It started with the child. I didn't ask what she meant. I knew better by then. She reached for the ring again, but didn't put it on, just held it in her fist. Then she said something stranger. "You were never supposed to be on the list." I stepped forward. "What list?" She turned and looked at me, really looked at me, like she was waking up from a long sleep. Her eyes were rimmed with something like smoke. "There's a name passed down every generation. They choose one. Always one. I waited, but you were born early, before they could decide, before the seal was finished." "The seal," I repeated. "Is that what the scar is?" She opened her hand. The ring sat in her palm like a coin no one wanted to spend. "There's more than one kind of vow," she said. "The legal ones don't hold up. The blood ones do." She reached into the drawer below the counter. The same one where we kept all the useless things, keys to locks that didn't exist, takeout menus from places that closed before Y2K dead pens. From the back, she pulled out an envelope. Brown, worn, not sealed. She slid it across the table. "I've read it," she said. "You should too." I didn't open it right away, just kept staring at the scar on her finger. She'd hidden it so well. I took the envelope upstairs, sat on my childhood bed, and opened it under the yellow lamplight. Inside a letter dated 1981, from my father, postmarked from Budapest. He disappeared in 1987. The letter was short. "Claire, if you're reading this, then she let you. That means something has changed. Maybe the pattern broke, maybe it didn't. Tell her I forgive her. Tell her the seal didn't hold. Tell her not to trust the silence. It always hides a deal." That's all. No return address, no salutation, no signature, just the initial. I folded it back up slowly, went to the mirror, pulled my shirt aside, and stared at my collarbone. I don't know what I was looking for. A scar, a mark, some proof that something had been passed down. There was nothing. But I could feel it, that quiet pull in the chest, like a door still closed but now humming with the sound of someone on the other side. That night, I went to the attic. There's a box up there I was never supposed to open. Tied shut with red thread, the kind used in sewing kits or in stories you don't tell out loud. She kept it behind the insulation near the chimney wall. It wasn't hard to find. Inside, old papers burned along the edges, names written in looping cursive. Some crossed out, some with black wax stains over them. Foreign bank ledgers. A strip of film negatives, blurry images of people standing outside what looked like the house, only older, smaller, and colder. And at the very bottom, a melted candle stub, red wax. The wick inside was black but unused, as if it had burned internally, but never on the surface. My fingers curled around it, and I heard the attic floor creak, but I hadn't moved. Neither had the wind. I stood and turned off the flashlight. Let the dark settle around me like a second skin, and for the first time in a long time, I said his name out loud. Dad nothing answered. But I swear the candle got warmer in my hand. Storm came in fast that night, not with thunder, but with a kind of slow suffocation, like the clouds had learned how to smother instead of roar. I watched the trees bend sideways through the back window, trying to remember if we'd ever had a summer this dark. The power blinked once, then again. Then the whole house went silent. No hum of the fridge, no ticking wall clock. Only the sound of rain starting to fall like fingers on an old piano. I lit the fireplace in the den with my mother's lighter, the same one she'd used at the will reading. I watched the flame take, and for a second, it felt like the only honest thing in the house. The candle holder sat beside me on the floor. I hadn't put it there. I should have been used to that by now. I stood and grabbed the flashlight from the drawer. I knew there were old candles in the cellar, my grandfather's hurricane stash lined up on a wooden shelf near the oil tank, the kind with thick white wax that never melted evenly. I used to go down there when I was little, pretending the cellar was a cave, but I'd never noticed the trapdoor. Not until now. It was stupid, really, just a bump, a slight unevenness in the floor. The flashlight rolled toward it when I dropped it reaching for a box. That's the only reason I found it. A loose board in the far corner, hidden beneath a torn mat soft from water damage. I lifted it. Underneath, brick. Old and wet, the kind that crumbled slightly at the corners when you touched it. Then I saw it. A brass ring embedded in the floor. I hesitated, felt the old fear crawl its way up my throat, dry and small, like dust. But I pulled. The door groaned open like it hadn't been touched in decades. A narrow corridor stretched beneath the cellar, barely wide enough for one person. It sloped downward. The air smelled like stone and metal and something faintly sweet. Not decay, something older, familiar. I stepped inside. The walls pressed close brick, sweating moisture. There was only one path. After maybe 30 feet, it ended in a door. Wood, deep brown, bound in iron bands. At the center, a wax seal, red, cracked. I didn't touch it. I just stared. The candle holder felt heavier in my hand. I could hear my father's words in the letter again. The seal didn't hold. I backed away. I took photographs, quick flash on sharp angles, enough to prove to myself I wasn't dreaming. Back upstairs, I locked the cellar. Not that it would help. When I showed my mother the photos the next day, she didn't ask how I found it. She just closed her eyes and said, "They promised it would stay sealed." Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. I sat across from her at the kitchen table waiting. She looked older than I remembered, not in the way time ages a person, but in the way knowledge weighs them down. Finally, she spoke. It wasn't a room, she said. It was a vault. For what, she opened her eyes. For promises, she said, and for names. I didn't understand. She took a deep breath, then reached for the candle holder, ran her finger along the base like it was a familiar scar. "You think we built this house," she said, "but we didn't. Not all of it." "What's under there?" I asked. She looked at me. "I don't know anymore." I didn't believe her. And I think she knew that. Later, I printed the photographs. I took them with me to town, showed them to the man who used to help restore churches out in Redford. He knew about old doors, old seals. He studied them with the magnifying glass, eyebrows rising. "This isn't for security," he said. "It's for containment." He tapped the cracked wax seal with his finger. "You see this mark here?" he asked. "That's not just decoration. That's a binding." "A binding," I repeated. He nodded. "It's not just about keeping people out. It's about keeping something in." On the way back, I drove slowly. Too slowly. I didn't want to get home. Not yet. But I knew I had to. The house had waited long enough. That night, as the rain finally stopped and the sky opened up, I went back to the cellar. I didn't go down the corridor. I just stood at the top of the steps, staring into the dark below. And I said something I hadn't said since I was 10 years old. "Who's down there?" Silence. Then just barely, just faintly, I thought I heard it. Not a voice. Not a word. Just the sound of breathing. Long, measured, like something remembering how to be alive. The morning was too bright. That thin, washed-out sunlight that makes everything look flat. Like the world's been painted over in primer. It was the kind of light that made you feel like something's missing, but you couldn't name what. I hadn't told anyone about the door. Not since showing my mother the photos. Not since her eyes did that thing again where they go far away like she's watching something on the other side of her own skull. She hadn't spoken much since, but that morning she collapsed. Right at the breakfast table. No warning. No cry. One moment she was stirring her tea, the next, her hand dropped and the cup shattered. I was on my feet before the sound even finished echoing. She was slumped over her eyes, wide lips barely moving. Her right hand twitched once, then again. And then she whispered something, barely audible. "Take it. That's all." She was in the hospital before noon. Stroke? Partial paralysis? They said she'd need weeks of rehab, maybe longer. They asked if she had a medical directive. I said I didn't know. She didn't ask for me. Not once. Just stared out the window like she was still at the kitchen sink with the ring off her finger. When I got home, the house was dead quiet. Too quiet. That hum was gone. The sense of something under the floors behind the walls, pressing its ear to every room that was gone too. And I didn't like it. I sat in her room for hours. Didn't cry. Didn't speak. Just waited. It wasn't until after dark that I found it. I was moving around the house looking for nothing really. Restlessness pretending to be purpose. I opened her closet, her drawers. I sat on her bed and pressed my palm to the quilt she sewed when I was 12. The one with all the squares from Dad's old shirts. That's when I noticed it. A slight indent in the floorboard beneath the bed. Not the kind that comes from wear. This was newer, intentional. I pulled the rug back and ran my hand along the wood. There it was. A groove. I pried it up with a butter knife. Beneath a narrow wooden box. The kind that might have held jewelry but didn't. Inside, a burned ledger, half charred. A torn map, edges curled with age. A photo of my grandfather standing beside a man with his face scratched out. And the candle stub, red wax, hollowed inside. I picked it up and held it to the light. There was something written inside the hollow, etched into the wax itself. 3 letters, CEL, my initials. But they weren't mine. They weren't just mine. I flipped the ledger open, pages blackened, but a few names still visible, 1 per year, a column for each generation. Some had check marks, some had black ink slashes through them. My father's name wasn't there. Mine was. At the bottom. No mark beside it. I sat back on my heels. Everything inside me was still. Not numb, not scared. Just still. Like my blood had settled into place and was no longer interested in moving. I went downstairs. Picked up the candle holder from the mantel where I'd last left it. Slipped the candle stub back inside. It fit. Perfectly. I carried it out to the garden, the same patch of earth where Mom used to bury dead birds and broken things. I lit a match, held it to the candle. Still wouldn't burn. So I did the only thing I could think of. I buried it, candle and holder, 6 inches down beneath the rosebush that hadn't bloomed in 4 years. And then I stood up and waited, not for a sign, not for a voice, just for the silence to change. But it didn't. It stayed flat, empty. Whatever had been circling this house for decades, whatever breathed behind the door in the cellar, it had gone still. Or gone deeper. That night, I didn't dream. And for the first time in my life, I woke up not expecting to scream. I just opened my eyes and felt nothing. Not fear, not relief. Just a space inside my chest that felt recently emptied, like a room where someone had just moved out. I didn't tell anyone I buried the candle. There was no one left to tell, not really. My mother was still in rehab, wrapped in a silence of her own now, and the rest of the family had scattered like roaches after the will reading, retreating into their corners, with hurt feelings and empty hands. But the house had changed. Something about it had flattened, like the temperature dropped a half degree permanently. The windows no longer held condensation in the mornings. The floorboards stopped groaning. Even the clocks ticked too evenly, like the house was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. Instead, I started making visits. Quiet ones. I went to see Uncle Frank first. He was out back, trimming hedges, acting like a man with nothing to hide and too much to remember. When I mentioned the door beneath the cellar, he dropped the shears. They landed blade down in the soil and stayed there. "You weren't supposed to go down there," he said. "I know." He looked at me real slow, real careful. "It's not for you." "Then who is it for?" I asked. He didn't answer, just picked up the shears and walked back into his house without another word. Next was Aunt Lydia. She always pretended to know less than she did, tight lips, tight bun, tighter faith. When I said the word packed, she didn't flinch. She just folded her napkin and said, "You should have let sleeping devils lie, Claire. That was all. And Lila." She laughed when I brought it up. Too loud, too quick. "Oh, that old ghost story," she said, pouring wine before noon. "You're not seriously poking around in all that. She wouldn't look me in the eye." I left her house feeling colder than when I walked in. But the worst came later, in the attic. I found another piece of the ledger. It had been hidden behind the insulation, tucked in with yellowed receipts and brittle newspaper clippings about the old oil business. A single page. Crisp, unburned. Across the top, it said lineage confirmations. A table of names, dates, parentage. One line for each generation. Then 3 columns, given, kept, unrecorded. My mother's name was listed under given. So was my grandfather and my great-grandmother. All down the list, every second generation gave someone, but my name had no column checked. Not yet. I took it downstairs, laid it on the kitchen table, and stared at it while the house exhaled its quiet breath around me. This wasn't just about money. It never had been. It was about debt. Not financial, not legal. Something older. A deal made long ago when the family was just starting out. When the land was still raw and the walls were still being raised. A pact made not with lawyers, but with silence. With blood. The fortune hadn't just come from oil. It had come from who didn't come back. Names that vanished from record. Years where one family member stopped being mentioned. Unrecorded, the ledger called them. Not dead, not exiled. Just given. I didn't want to understand what that meant. But I did. That night, I sat at the foot of my mother's bed, her absence stretching across the blankets. I held the page in my lap, running my fingers over her name. She had been the given of her generation. But she hadn't passed the name forward. She'd held it, kept it, and then burned the check. Not because she wanted to escape the legacy, but because she knew it was her last move before the debt circled back. They always chose one, and when she didn't choose, they chose me. The next morning, the black car was parked at the end of the driveway again. I didn't go outside, didn't move, just watched from the window as it idled. Eventually it left, and I realized deep in my chest something had shifted. This wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't about running. It was about understanding what had been handed to me. Not a fortune, a role. One I hadn't agreed to, but one I might be able to rewrite. She came home in a wheelchair. The nurse pushed her up the ramp that had never been there before, and for a second, it felt like I was watching someone else's life. Someone else's mother. Her hands rested quietly on the arms of the chair, her face unreadable. Her hair had gone grayer in the last few weeks, less streaks, more surrender. The first thing she said wasn't hello. It was. I left it upstairs. We both knew what it was. I helped her inside. The walls didn't creak like they used to. Even the house had adjusted to her smaller presence. I made her tea she barely touched and sat across from her at the table, where she once told me names were more dangerous than knives. Neither of us said much, but she kept looking at me like she expected something. "What happens if I burn it?" I asked finally. She didn't blink. "Then it stops with you. And if I keep it, you'll understand everything." We didn't talk for the rest of the day. That night, I went upstairs and found the book. It was thin, smelled like smoke, wrapped in black cloth that had once been velvet. I unwrapped it slowly, my fingers hesitating over every fold, like I was untying something alive. Inside the ledger, the real one, not copies, not fragments. Every page had names, one per year, one per generation. The ink changed colors, some entries in quill, some typed, some printed with shaky penmanship. But the rhythm never changed. A name, a mark, a consequence. Some pages had a circle drawn beside the name, some a line, some nothing. I found my grandfather, circled, my mother, circled. And then I turned to the last page. My name. Claire Eddington. Blank. Just a name on a page waiting for an outcome. There were no instructions. No page that said do this or do not. Just names and consequences and one small handwritten phrase scribbled on the inside cover. "This is not punishment. It is balance." I carried the book out back to the garden. The fire pit was still damp from yesterday's rain. I lit a few twigs anyway, fed it kindling until the flame took. I stood there with the book in my hands, fingers pressed into the leather binding, like it might bleed if I squeezed too hard. I thought about everything I'd learned, what I hadn't, the door beneath the cellar, the man with the red tie, the silence that came before storms. I looked down at my name, the empty space beside it. I could end it here. Now. One match, one choice. I opened the book to that page and stared at my name until it stopped looking like mine. Then I held the book over the flame. The fire reached up eager, and then it stopped. Right at the edge of the paper. The book wouldn't burn. No matter how I angled it, no matter how close I pressed it into the flame, the fire curved around it like water skirting oil. It didn't take. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I didn't even feel disappointment. I just set the book on the brick edge of the pit and watched the fire die back down. It wasn't time yet. Or maybe I wasn't the one meant to end it. I walked back inside, barefoot. The floors were cold and smooth. The house didn't hum anymore, but it didn't resist either. In the morning, I placed the book in my mother's lap. She ran her fingers across the cover like someone petting an old dog. "You tried," she said. "I did." "You think it won't burn because of you?" she said, her eyes meeting mine for the first time all week. "But it won't burn because it hasn't chosen yet." "I thought you already did." She shook her head. "I tried to. But I never gave you the ledger. It has to be offered and taken." "You think I should keep it?" "No," she said. Then more softly, "I think you already have." That night, I didn't bury it, didn't hide it. I left it in the open on the mantel, a single red thread wrapped around its spine. Not tied, just placed. And for the first time since I was a child, the candle on the windowsill flickered. Lit on its own, a small, slow flame. I woke up just before dawn, the kind of waking that doesn't feel like coming out of sleep, but more like being pulled from underwater. My chest was tight, like something had pressed down on me all night. The house was still. No wind, no hum of the heater, just the silence again, sharp, too quiet, with no edges to hold on to. I went to the window. Fog, thick as milk pressing against the glass like it wanted in. The candle on the windowsill had burned down to a thin nub, still smoking. That's when I heard the sound. Faint, from below. A soft click. Wood shifting, stone dragging. I moved fast, the cold biting at my legs as I passed through the hall down the steps toward the cellar door. I didn't need the flashlight this time. The door at the bottom of the corridor was open. Not wide, just enough. A sliver of shadowed space. The cracked seal, now completely broken wax, scattered like dried blood across the brick floor. I paused at the top of the corridor. My fingers brushed the wall where someone, maybe my grandfather, maybe someone else, had etched faint notches into the mortar. 7 of them, evenly spaced. Marks of a countdown or of years past. I walked the corridor, the air growing colder, wetter, heavier. My breath came back to me in small white clouds. The door hadn't been forced. It had opened itself. Inside the room was empty, or it appeared to be. No furniture, no markings, just 4 stone walls and a single mirror hanging from rusted chains. And a chair? Facing it. I don't remember sitting, but I found myself in the chair, the stone hard beneath me. The mirror didn't reflect the room behind me. It only reflected me. Or something close to me. She was older, just enough to notice. Her eyes were the same shape, same color, but stiller. Like they'd seen something I hadn't. She wore the same black t-shirt I'd put on that morning, but her hands rested differently on her knees, like she knew what they were for. And on her finger, the scar. The same perfect circle that had lived beneath my mother's ring. I stared at her. She stared back. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. But her presence pressed against me like heat from a closed oven. I didn't ask questions. I just sat there and watched myself watching me. After a while, I stood. The chair scraped lightly on the floor, and the sound made the whole space feel suddenly too small. As I turned to leave, I saw it. On the far wall, just above the floor, something new. A ledge. And on it, the candle holder. Brass. Polished. Waiting. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up. It was warm in my hand. No candle inside this time. Just a folded scrap of paper. I opened it slowly. A name. Not mine. Not my mother's. But someone else's. Someone I didn't know. And beneath it a date. Next year. I didn't take the paper. I left it there, folded neatly, and walked back up the corridor without looking back. I didn't need to. The house greeted me with a shudder, like a held breath finally released. The mirror room didn't lock behind me. The door stayed open. The candle holder sat on my nightstand by dusk. This time, the wick had returned. And I didn't try to light it. Not yet. I sat by the window watching the fog pull back from the trees. And I waited. She died in her sleep. No warnings, no coughing, no final glance. Just a flat line on the monitor sometime after 2 a.m. The nurse said her face looked peaceful, like she'd just drifted. But I don't think that's true. Not because I saw her. Because of what didn't happen. No phone call woke me. No shiver in the air. No flickering light in the hallway. Just stillness. I knew before the phone rang. I knew before the sun rose. The morning after the house was brighter than I'd ever seen it. Every window stretched wide with light like the walls had finally given up holding something in. At the funeral, people I hadn't seen in years showed up. Hollow faces, old names, distant relatives who flew in for the spectacle of it all. They whispered in the pews, more curious than sad. She'd kept them all away for so long. They didn't come to mourn. They came to ask questions they'd never have the courage to say out loud. They thought I'd cry. I didn't. I had done all my grieving before I ever understood what I was grieving for. When the casket closed, it felt like sealing a letter I would never send. After the service, the lawyer met me by the back exit of the church. Same man from the will reading, his voice a little gentler now, but still shaped like paperwork. She left something he said and handed me an envelope. Not brown this time, just plain white. Inside a note and a key. The note was written in my mother's script, sharp fast a little slanted to the left. The real inheritance is your name. Make it mean something else. Below that, no signature, no flourish, just the finality of a line drawn. The key was small, brass, worn, the same one I used to see hanging from the chain around her neck when I was little. I once asked her what it opened. She said a promise. I knew where it fit. The old storage room at the back of the east wing. The one we never used. The one that had been padlocked since before I was born. I hadn't even thought of it in years. The key slid in like it had never been removed. Inside a room covered in dust but not decay. Blankets over furniture. A desk. A wall covered in old photographs pinned in rows. Generations of faces. My mother, my grandfather, a few I didn't recognize, and at the center, framed under glass, a different kind of ledger. Not names and marks, but letters, notes, refusals, each one written by someone in the family who had once stood where I was now. Each one choosing not to give, not to keep, but to walk away. Dozens of letters, folded neatly, all ending the same way I choose silence over debt. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it hope, or just a collection of failed resistance? I walked out of that room with the brass key clenched in my palm and something heavier sitting in my chest. This wasn't about breaking a curse. It was about changing the terms, rewriting what a name could mean when no one was watching. That night, I sat on the porch again. The candle holder was beside me. The wick glowed faintly in the dusk, though no flame had touched it. I didn't light it. I didn't need to. Inside the house breathed quieter, not empty, not haunted, just waiting. And for once I wasn't afraid of what came next. I didn't stay in the house. Not for long. I packed what I needed, a few clothes, the ledger, the candle holder, the letters she left me. I left the photographs on the wall. Let the dust cover the decisions of those who came before. Some histories aren't meant to be rewritten, only paused, held in place like insects in amber. I didn't tell the family. I didn't write a note. I just walked out. No one stopped me. The morning I left the house felt lighter. Not free, but unburdened, as if it knew, as if it had been waiting too. The cellar door remained sealed, the corridor beneath it silent. I locked the front door behind me with a key that hadn't been used in 30 years and left it in the mailbox for whoever came next. Maybe no one would. Maybe the house would sit quiet for another generation, watching the trees and holding its breath. I drove without a destination. Just distance. It took me 3 days to find where I wanted to be. A town no one in my family ever visited. No connections. No names that echoed against the walls. I rented a small apartment above a bookstore. The kind of place where time forgets to move forward. The woman who owned it never asked about my past. She just handed me the keys and said, "Welcome." I unpacked the ledger last. Placed it on the shelf between a worn copy of Beloved and a dictionary I hadn't opened since college. I didn't read it again. I just left it there, like a question I didn't need answered anymore. The candle holder sat on the windowsill. Some nights the wick glowed faintly in the dark like a heartbeat that refused to die. I never lit it. I didn't have to. It burned when it needed to. When people asked about my last name, I told them Eddington with the kind of tone that closes a conversation. But once, just once, I told someone the full story. Not the details. Not the ledger, or the door, or the mirror, or the man with the red tie. Just the truth in its most stripped form. My family kept a debt going for generations, I said. But it stopped with me. They nodded like they understood. Maybe they didn't. Maybe they did. I think in some ways we all inherit things no one else can see. Some people get land, some get secrets, some get silence, and some of us, we get fire. The kind that doesn't destroy. The kind that shows us what not to carry forward. My name is Claire Eddington, and I didn't take the money. I didn't take the house. I didn't even take the photographs. But I took something. I took the part of the story no one else wanted. The doorway. The silence. The flame that never asked permission. And I let it become mine.